y'all, my name is Bailey Reber. I'm the founder of Threading Together Hope, a community building sustainable project where we teach people how to make t-shirt blankets out of unwanted t-shirts that can then be given out to the homeless populations in order to support them during the cold winters ahead. This project began here in Houston, Texas, but honestly, you guys can do this in your local communities wherever you live. So the thing about it is we are specifically using unwanted t-shirts that would otherwise be thrown away if they were given to a thrift store, or maybe they've got a hole, or it's from high school, something that you're never gonna wear again. The thing with t-shirts, we all love them, right? We get them for events we go to, that one time we volunteered, a concert we loved. Things change. We change sizes or shapes, or we decide we don't care about this shirt from our high school, I don't know, bonfire in 2002. So what are we going to do with these shirts? Nobody's going to buy them. You can try to give them to a thrift store, but most of them end up in a landfill. So instead, the idea is to take these and to create something that can be used for somebody else. Guys, our homeless population, they are in need of things to keep them warm, especially with the winter coming ahead. It is a great thing that we're doing is by taking these shirts that would be in a landfill and instead making a blanket that can keep somebody warm. So enough talking, let's go ahead and dive in on how to make these blankets. Let's start by discussing supplies. Of course, you're going to need t-shirts, and depending on the size of your shirts, you'll need at least 9 to 12 of them. Check the description to see exactly how many you'll need based upon the size of the t-shirts you have. You'll also need scissors, a Sharpie, a ruler, sewing pins, and thread. So now that we have all of our supplies, the first thing that we're going to do is go through all of the t-shirts. We're going to look at the sizes and find out which one is the smallest first. Okay, so extra large is the smallest I have in this pile. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use this as our guide as to how large we're going to make each of the squares for the t-shirt blanket. So we're going to start by getting the t-shirt laid out as flat as possible. If you have access to an iron, I highly recommend you taking that to iron out all of the wrinkles. We're going to take our ruler and we're going to start just along the edge here. We want to put it right outside this. We don't want any of this. Everything from here out, we do not want. And then we're just going to draw a straight line all the way down. Doesn't have to be perfect. Same on this side. Take this, let's go and spread that out a little. To straight line all the way down. Now we want to go across. So again, we want to keep all of this neckline out. That is of no use to us. So we're going to take this here. We're going to draw straight line across. Sometimes it helps to start in the middle and go outward. Keeps the fabric from shifting so much. And then same with the bottom. I'm going to come all the way down. Remember, we want none of this. Take this, spread it out a bit. Go down, draw a straight line across. All right, now I'm going to take our pins and we are going to pin along the edges. Make sure you pin inside the line because we're going to cut the black line. we are going to pin closely to it, as this is going to help to keep our fabric from shifting while we cut it. And we're going to use plenty of pins. We're not going to be stingy. Make sure you're picking up both the front and the back while you're pinning this. Smoothing it out where you can. Okay. Now that we have it all pinned, we're going to take our scissors and we're going to cut along these black lines. It's okay if it's not perfect or if it's a little crooked, because that's going to get covered up. So now we have two rectangles made out of one t-shirt, and we're going to actually use one of these as a pattern moving forward. But first, we're going to take our ruler and check our measurements to make sure that each of the sides are equal to each other. So we've got 16 inches by about 20.5 inches. Now we're going to go ahead and make sure that this down here, this is a little bit longer. So we are going to cut some of this off. Now you can avoid this by measuring it directly ahead of time, but I'll show you what you can do in case you make a mistake like this, like what I did. So this is 16 inches here. We'll actually take this up here. And we're going to mark this. We're going to say here and here. So we will open this up and we will take this from the edge to here. We're going to draw another line to make it more straight. To line that up with that there. I'm going to start in the middle, boom, boom. Same over here. Start in the middle and we avoid that problem. Boom. So we'll take our pins and we'll repin next to these edges. Same on this side. It's okay that we see the black lines. Again, they're going to be completely covered up. We're going to flip it. It's easier to cut from the widest to the smallest. Same on this side. Okay. This is what we're going to use moving forward with every set as our pattern. So we're going to take the two layers apart. Now we've got two pieces, right? Got one for the front and a second one that can be used for the back. Now we're going to put this one aside. Put that into our pile for later. Now this here is gonna be our pattern for all of our other pieces moving forward. So how that's gonna work is we're gonna take our next shirt, we're gonna lay it out, make sure it's nice and smooth. And we're gonna place this guy right on top of it. Now it's gonna wanna wiggle around. So you're gonna do your best to make sure that everything is smooth. Might take a little bit of maneuvering. That's a little bumpy right there. Let's kind of smooth that out. Again, it's okay if it's not perfect. It is better to use a t-shirt that has already been ironed. So if you have an iron, like I said, take this guide to the iron and make sure that they're flat. It makes it a lot easier for doing this. Boom. Now we've got our pattern piece. Gonna do the same thing again. Gonna take our pins, gonna pin around all the edges. Now we're gonna take our scissors and we're gonna cut around all the edges. Voila, now we've got 2 more pieces. So we'll set these aside.
And we'll keep doing this with every single t-shirt until all of them are cut out and ready to be sewn together.
Okay, so now that we have our stack of t-shirts, we are ready to start pinning them so we can then sew them. So a couple things. First, you might notice that on the backs of some of the shirts, if they had a graphic back there, you might have accidentally cut some of it off. Guys, that is totally okay. This is a sustainability project. We are focused more on using as much of the t-shirt as possible versus putting the graphics on there. So again, this is a sustainable project. If you're looking for a video on how to make a memorable t-shirt blanket, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I will be uploading one of those soon if I haven't already. But otherwise, remember, this is sustainability, so we don't really care how it looks. That said, when we start pinning all of these t-shirts together into the squares to make the blanket, it doesn't really matter what the layout is. If you want to get creative and make some kind of pattern and switch it up, you are more than welcome to. But again, that is not necessary as we are focused on making blankets that can be repurposed for other people, specifically the homeless population here in Houston. We are not focused on what they look like. So let's go ahead and talk about how we're gonna pin and what we're gonna pin. So I'm gonna recommend making 2 different stacks because you're gonna have the front side of the blanket and the back side. So that said, you need 9 shirts for each side. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm actually gonna do just to make things a little bit easier is I'm just gonna take all of the fronts and stick those in one stack and leave all of the backs for the other stack. Again, doesn't matter, you don't have to do this. Part of why I'm doing this is it will make it a little bit easier when we're sewing. You may have realized when you were cutting that some of the shapes maybe were a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller than the other, even though you used a pattern. So because we didn't iron all of these ahead of time, they had some wrinkles, which could affect the size of them. So don't worry, I'm gonna go over what we can do to fix that if we run into any of those issues. If you went ahead and ironed all of them ahead of time, go you, you're the best. You're gonna have the easiest time making this. Okay, so I've got my 2 piles. I've got my crazy pile, backside, and then I've got my fronts. So this blanket has 9 shirts. So we're gonna do 3 rows of 3. Super simple, super easy. So that said, we are gonna pin all of the rows together first. So we're gonna pin 3 across, We're gonna do that 3 different times before we start any of the sewing. So let's take a look at how we're gonna do that. So we're gonna take our pins and we're gonna take 3 shirts. We're gonna take 1, 2, 3. Put the rest of them aside. So we're gonna put the shirt face up. See, I've got a little crooked there. That's totally okay. We can just take our handy dandy scissors and just straighten it up a bit. Boom, problem solved. So we're gonna take a second shirt and we're gonna put it face down. We're gonna line up one of the edges. So for this, we're gonna use this side over here. And we're going to just line these up. So this here, this is what we're gonna sew. So we're gonna pin this all across here. So we're gonna start by putting two pins on this side. We're gonna jump over here and put 2 pins on this side. And we're gonna keep doing that. We call this playing tennis. Gonna jump from side to side. So now we're just gonna go 1 and go 1. And then same over here. 1 and 1. And then we'll just put 1 in the middle here. So the reason we go here, and we jump back and forth is because that makes sure that this edge here is exactly lined up, and so is this one here. And if there's any excess, we can kind of disperse it between all of this. So now we're gonna go ahead and open this up and we're gonna see, okay, boom and boom and boom. So we're gonna take our third shirt and we're gonna connect it the same way, face down, over here. So we're going to continue on using the same method by starting on each edge and pinning back and forth until it's completely pinned shut. There we go. So now we've got 3 shirts all pinned together. Okay, so now that we have these pinned together, these 3 here, this is going to be 1 row. So we are ready to go ahead and start sewing this with the machine. Now, for those of you who have an excess of pins, I recommend definitely start pinning a 2nd row or even a 3rd row if you have enough pins for that. I just find it easier if I can do as many of the same step as once. It just makes it go a bit faster. If you're not worried about time, relax and let's just go ahead and let's get these all stitched together. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and sew. So first of all, thread color is an important, again, sustainability. So I recommend just finding some thread that is an obscure color that you're never going to use again. Another great thing that you can do is you can purchase thread from thrift stores. That is actually a beautiful way to repurpose threads. I think that's one place that's very well overlooked. I know I forget about it sometimes too. But if you're doing this to be sustainable and you want this to be 100% sustainable, go find some used thread or some thread you're never going to use again. Best options. So before we start, it's important to note that we'll be using a straight stitch and the length will be about 2.5. You can go as low as 2. 2.5 is just standard in the fashion industry, so that is just typically what I use for everything these days. Okay, so we're gonna make sure our needle and everything is threaded, and we are gonna start by taking one section
And we're actually just gonna go ahead and line it up right to the side of our presser foot. That should be roughly about 1/4 of an inch. You are welcome to go a little bit wider, 1/2 inch. I like to use the presser foot as a guide. It just makes it easier. So we are going to get this situated under here, remembering to remove our pins. And let's start sewing. Remember, we're gonna back tack so it doesn't come apart. And just gonna chug right along. So if you've never sewn before, or it's been a while since you last sewed, just remember, we need to remove these pins. It's very important that we don't run them over with our machine. Doing so can cause lots of harm. And then make sure you back tack at the end like I just did there. We're gonna cut it loose. Perfect. Now we're gonna move on to the next set. So once you complete this row, you will repeat the exact same process with the next 2 rows until they're each completed. Okay, so now that we have sewn all of our rows together, we should have 3 rows of 3, since we are doing a 9 square blanket. First, what we want to do is we want to make sure we cut off all the extra threads. You can see I've got some hanging around here. We're going to cut these off. And now we're going to actually start forming the blanket. So now we're going to take all of these and actually put them together to form the front side of the blanket. So how we're going to do that is going to be just like how we did with each of the individual squares. We're just going to do it on a much larger scale now. So let's start by taking one of the rows here. And we're going to put this other row face down. And how we want it to look is like this, right? We want these all to go the same exact direction. So in order to do that, the bottom of this row needs to be attached to the top of this row. So we're going to achieve that by just taking this row like this, and we're just going to plop it face down. So now we've got the bottom of this and the top of this. We're going to take these and we're going to start by pinning the middle one first. We're going to line up the 2 seams right here. I like to put a pin on each of these guys here just to help to keep them down. The seam allowance can get annoying and in the way. It just makes it a lot easier if you pin each side of the seam allowance down. So then go and slide over and match up these 2 seams. And we're going to pin these at the seam allowance as well. Now we're going to take this middle section and we're going to go ahead and pin in between here. Now we're going to go to this side and we're going to pin the 2 ends together first. And I'm going to go jump back to this side. And then finally, we're going to go back to this side and do the same thing. We're going to start at the very end. Okay, so Now that these are all pinned, we're gonna head to our machine and get to sewing. So we're gonna do the same exact thing. We're going to just line it up on the edge here of our presser foot. And that will, actually, that'll be our guide the entire time. So just keep that in mind. Okay, when you get here where you have the two different seam allowances pinned together, that might be a little bit tricky. So what we're gonna do is we are going to slowly inch towards it. And we want to watch and make sure that this seam allowance doesn't start trying to roll up, because it might try to do that. Boom. Okay, so now that we have that in there, let's open this up. We're going to take this and just kind of smooth it out, settle it down, set it back down again. So now we should be good to go with no more issues, because this seam allowance is facing this direction, which is the way we're sewing. And yeah, if you want to look at that from there, we've got it straight across. That's perfect. So now we're just going to keep on sewing. Once you're done sewing these two rows together, you will repeat the exact same process to get the third row sewn on. That way you have one complete side of the blanket finished. Okay, so now at this point you should have the front of your t-shirt blanket made. Let's take a look at this real quick. So we've got all the squares lined up. So now what we need to do is sew the back. In order to sew the back, we're gonna do the exact same steps all over again, just with the other 9 pieces we have. So let's go ahead and get to work on doing that, and then we'll do the finishing touches. Front's done. Now the back is done. So now let's put these 2 pieces together. So first of all, I don't really have a big table to work on. If you have a really big space where you can spread the entire blanket face up, please utilize the space. I don't have the space. A lot of us watching probably don't have the space either. So I'm gonna show you how you can get by without having all of the space. So the first thing we wanna do is we wanna make sure that the front is laying down, face up. Whatever surface you're using, use something, okay? I have an IKEA table. This is really tiny. It's still gonna work, I promise. So then we're gonna take our back and we're gonna hold it by the top, because we have the top of the front down here and we need to line the top of the back with it. So we're gonna take the top of the back and we're just gonna put it face down with the top of the front. And at this point, we're gonna take our handy dandy pins and we're gonna do what we've always done before, which is pin it. We're gonna start with these seams here in the middle. Get these lined up and get the seam allowances pinned, just like we've been doing this entire time. And then we're gonna go ahead and get the entire top pinned first. So let's go ahead and take care of that. Alrighty, so once we have the top fully pinned all the way across, we're then gonna work on pinning down the sides. Again, same method, matching the seams, pinning those seam allowances down, and then pinning all the way through the tennis method. If you don't have enough pins to keep going, I totally understand. If that's the case, go ahead and stop and sew this one across. Pull out all your pins and then sew down one side first and another side next, and then wait for the bottom. We have to do something special with the bottom so that we can flip it inside out. So let's go ahead and get the top and the 2 sides stitched all the way shut, and then we'll go from there. Okay, y'all, you should now have 3 sides completely sewn. We've got the side, the top, and the other side. They're all sewn completely shut. So now all we have left is the bottom. So the bottom is going to be special. We have to leave a hole so that we can flip it right side out because currently it is inside out. So how we're going to do that is we're going to do the exact same thing that we've done a million times before now, where we start with these 2 seams on the inside. Except we're just going to go ahead and go from this seam outwards. We're going to do it a little bit backwards because we want to make sure that we're not going to forget about that hole and that we're going to leave that there. Now we're going to go all the way to the other side and we're going to get these seams matched up and then pin all the way to the corner edge. Okay, so now that we have each of the sides, we're going to go to the middle. So let's go ahead and pin the middle all the way shut so we make sure that it's even all the way across. And then we're going to remove some pins to make that hole. But when we remove those pins, we're going to be strategic about it, you guys, because we don't want to forget that that hole's in the middle right there, right? Because that would be really bad. We don't want to sew it shut because if we sew it shut, we then have to rip all the stitches out and that's just annoying. So we've got it pinned straight all the way across. Now I always try to do a little bit bigger hole. That's usually better. So I'm going to take this pin that's right here and I'm just going to put it right next to this one here. So having 2 pins next to each other, that's going to tell me, hey, stop here. This is where we're going to stop. And then I'm going to take this pin that's over here and we're going to shift it right here so that we have a pretty decent size hole to work with. Guys, it's always better to be a little bit bigger than to be a little bit too small. You don't want to accidentally rip it while trying to flip it inside out. So now let's go to the sewing machine and I'm going to show you how we're going to easily do this. Here's a close-up visual for you to see. We've got a hole that's pretty large, but we've got 2 pins to signify starting and stopping. Okay, so let's get sewing. So we're going to start like we always do. I'm going to start here on the edge. And we're going to sew. We're going to back tack first. Now we're coming up on the double pins. So when we get to those, we're going to stop right in front of it. Go backwards a few stitches and then come forward to back tack and then we're going to stop. So we're here, we're going to go back, 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 forward, 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 done. So we're going to lift this up. And instead of cutting the thread, we're actually going to save a little thread by just going like this. We're going to pull that out a little bit and then we're just going to start here. And we will cut those threads when we're done. So now we can remove these 2 pins because that's our new starting point. And then we're going to sew until we're finished. Remember to back tack as always. Okay, so now we are almost done. 2 last steps. So we've got the gaping hole here and it's a little tight because we left those strings. So let's go ahead and cut off those excess on both sides. Now before we flip it so that we can sew this hole shut, let's go ahead and open up this hole and flip this guy right side out. Boom. So use your finger, find the little corners and use your finger to push them out so that they're not folded in on themselves. I usually try to find an edge where I know that there's different colors meeting and I just keep following it. We're going to push all of these little corners out. Again, just use your fingers, it's easier. Don't use scissors. You will end up cutting up the t-shirt on accident or poking a hole and we don't want to do that. Okay, so we're gonna shut the hole and then we have one final step. So let me show you guys how we're gonna close this up. Okay, so right here we have our little gaping hole. So what we need to do is we need to fold it in on itself so that we can sew this shut. Now it's about 1/4 of an inch because that's what we've been sewing our seam allowance on. I like to always start right where I know it started. And then I also put a pin afterwards because we're going to sew it a little bit further to make sure we get every inch of that hole. I'm going to come over here. We're going to flip this under. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We just need to get it shut. We also don't want these raw edges hanging out because when the raw edges hang out, that is leaving room for it to fray. So again, we started here, so we're going to go a little bit further so we can make sure we get all of it. And we're going to just keep turning both of them inwards towards each other. And then pinning it shut. I'm going to do the tennis method like we've been doing, one side to the next. All right, so before we sew this, there's 2 different methods. We could either sew a straight stitch all the way across, getting as close to the edge as possible, making sure that we close the gaps. Or we could do a zigzag stitch because a zigzag will ensure that we are catching each little bit. So let's head to the machine and we'll decide what we're going to do. Okay, so now that we're at the machine, I'm actually going to do a zigzag stitch and show you guys what that kind of looks like. The reason we're picking this is because it's going to go back and forth, so it's going to get closer to the edge without having to sew close to the edge. It's a little bit easier, especially for beginners. So let's go ahead and get started. And just like with regular straight stitches, you still need to back tack with a zigzag stitch. So as you can see, I used a pretty long zigzag stitch. But what it did is it ensured that everything was caught. Nothing is coming out. See, that just makes it so much easier than trying to sew so close on the edge. So again, if it's easier for you to do a straight stitch on the edge, you can do that. I just wanted to show you this extra idea for some added security if you were afraid of missing the edges. So we still have one more step left. Let's go talk about that and then we'll be done. Okay. So now that we have the hole sewn shut, we have one final step. So if you take a look at your blanket, you're going to see that it's shifting around a lot, right? Like this is going to become a huge ball and mess because each side is just shifting around. So we're going to solve this issue by going and doing a top stitch around the edge of the entire blanket. So that way it'll stay and it won't shift around so much, it'll stay firm. So let's head on over to the sewing machine and I'm going to show you exactly how we're going to do this. So before we start sewing, you can pin down the edges if you'd like to keep it from shifting so much while you're sewing. So if you do that, you'll kind of take this and you'll just wiggle it and get those 2 seam allowances together like so. And then you'll go ahead and pin it. And you would keep doing this around the edge of the entire blanket. Now, I personally don't think that this step is necessary. Again, these blankets are a sustainability project. We are doing this to give some warmth to Houston's local homeless population. They do not have to be perfect. They just need to be functional. So this here is going to allow you to make it more perfect. Now, if you want to practice your stitching and practice doing this properly, then yeah, I would recommend pinning it. Otherwise, once we get past the pins, I'll show you what I do in order to just get a quick stitch on top so that we can have it stay put. We're going to go ahead and line this up. Now, previously we were working with the edge of the presser foot. which that would give a nice little edge, but honestly, I think we want more. We want it to be a little bit further inwards. We want it to be further inwards. That way it can help to avoid some of this shifting more. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to line mine up right here with this guy. We really don't need a perfect measurement. If you have something on your machine that is easy, you could even go as far as this metal piece right here if you wanted to go that far. Whatever works best for you, but find a guide on your machine that's going to be easy for you to follow and stay consistent the entire way through. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but practice makes progress, and so we should practice making straight lines just because, again, this is for practice and progress purposes. So let's go ahead and slide this here, and like I said, I'm going to use this here as my guide, this edge right here. So we're going to do like we always do, and I'm going to just start right at the top. I'm not going to try to worry about the measurements. I'm going to start right up here, and I'm going to start sewing, remembering to back tack. Now, so as you can see, since we are sewing so far away from the edge, these pins really aren't that necessary. It's not doing a whole lot to keep it from shifting. So instead, let's keep going, and I'm going to show you what I do to kind of work it to make it not shift while sewing. Also, I forgot to mention, but we are going to start with the bottom first. It's always best to do that because that way all the starts and stops are going to be at the bottom, which is less noticeable overall. So now we're getting to an area where it's not pinned together, it's not sewn shut, and so we have the tendency for it to slip and shift. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this here, and I'm just going to use my fingers to kind of maneuver it. And then I'm going to sew until I get to where my finger is here. Now I'm going to stop. I'm going to make sure my needle is anchored downwards so that way the fabric doesn't slip. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to use my fingers to kind of maneuver it and shift it into place. Put it back down, and we're going to keep going. And we're going to continue doing this throughout all of the edges of the blanket from where we started until we get to the ending. Happy sewing! So now let's talk about what we do when we get to the corner. So again, we're just looking for function, not for perfection. So we are going to stitch. We're not going to go all the way off the edge, but we're going to stop somewhere in this general region. And we're going to guesstimate. We're going to guesstimate since we're going this far. We're going to look and say, okay, well, that's about right here. So that's about where we're going to stop. And then I'll show you how to pivot, if you don't know how to pivot the fabric under the machine. So we're going to stop there. We're going to keep our needle anchored inward. Going to lift up our presser foot. And we are going to pivot the fabric. And look at that. That is almost perfection. Wow, I have some experience, don't I? So now we're going to keep going. And this is exactly what we're going to repeat until we get to the final edge. So let's continue. Okay, so now when you get to the very end and you're coming to the starting point, you have two options. You can either keep sewing and just run it all the way off. That's the very simple way, as long as you back tack it before you hit the edge. Or you can actually stop right here and make it look more cohesive. I prefer stopping right here where we started. I think it just looks a lot better. Even though we're not going for looks here, you can use this as practice to stop and start at the same point. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do now. And remember, we're always going to back tack when we finish off a stitch. Now, I'm not perfect. I'm a human, but that is good enough. Voila! Now that we have the top stitch all along the edges, we're now done. So as you can see, it's not shifting like it was. This is keeping it in place. Sure, it can open up this way, but for the most part,
This is gonna be a sturdy blanket. It's gonna keep some people warm. I am so proud of you. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you learned a lot throughout this. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. There's so many more sewing videos coming through, more how-tos, especially with sustainable projects. That is one of my big things. I love sustainability and recycling. So until next time, y'all.